He hadn't been back here in 7 years. Not since the divorce. Not since Clara walked out with nothing but a suitcase and a heart too heavy to speak. He told himself he didn't miss it. The sprawling estate, the ivy-covered stone walls, the creak of the porch swing where they used to sit watching sunsets with wine glasses in hand. But now, as the gates of Langford Manor appeared through the mist, his chest tightened like a fist closing around something fragile. He slowed the car, staring at the wrought iron archway crowned with faded gold letters. Langford. Once that name meant power, legacy. Now it felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Alexander stepped out into the drizzle, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled of wet soil and wild rosemary, Clara's favorite. He hadn't realized she'd planted it along the drive until now. A small detail, insignificant to anyone else. To him, it was a knife between the ribs. He walked toward the front door, key trembling in his hand. It turned with surprising ease, as if the house had been waiting. "Hello?" he called out, voice rough from disuse. No answer. Just the groan of floorboards beneath his weight. The distant tick of a grandfather clock still keeping time in the hall. He dropped his briefcase by the door and wandered into the drawing room. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through tall windows. Everything was exactly as he remembered, except for the vase of fresh white lilies on the mantel, and the teacup on the side table, still warm. His breath caught. "Someone's been here," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone. A log shifted in the fireplace, though no fire burned. He frowned, stepping closer. Then he saw it. A single strand of dark hair caught in the armrest of Clara's favorite chair. His throat went dry. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." But even as denial rose in his chest, something deeper stirred. Guilt, sharp and sudden. He'd left this place behind without a second thought, assuming Clara had done the same. He'd built empires, signed billion-dollar deals, dated socialites whose names he barely remembered, all while pretending this chapter of his life had closed neatly. Yet here he was, and someone she had never truly left. He sank into the chair, running a hand over his face. For the first time in years, Alexander Langford felt small, exposed. Like the man the world saw, the tycoon, the visionary, the untouchable, was just a costume, and underneath, he was still the boy who'd failed to hold on to the one thing that ever made him feel real. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat returning. And somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. He froze. "Clara?" he called, voice cracking. Silence. But the air had changed. Warmer. Closer. As if the past had just stepped into the room and was watching him, waiting to see if he'd finally be honest. Alexander didn't move, didn't breathe. All he could hear was the thunder rolling in the distance, and the quiet, relentless pounding of his own regret. Okay, now act as a narrator and storyteller. Develop the story without marking each topic as you develop it. Tell me about topic 2 with dialogue as if I were the spectator, always remembering to develop it with a lot of emotion, with many feelings, so that the narrative structure uses a linear timeline so that the spectator feels what the character is feeling. In English, with 6,000 characters, 2:06 p.m., the morning light spilled through the tall windows of Langford Manor like liquid gold, soft and forgiving. Too forgiving for a man who didn't deserve it. Alexander stood in the hallway, still in yesterday's wrinkled shirt, staring at the faint trail of wet footprints leading from the kitchen toward the east wing. They were small, delicate, not his. His pulse quickened. He followed them slowly, each step heavier than the last, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, Clara's tea. He hadn't smelled it in years, yet his body remembered it like a reflex, like muscle memory of a life he'd tried to bury. At the end of the corridor, the door to the old sunroom stood slightly ajar. Through the crack, he saw her. Clara. She sat by the window in a simple linen dress, her dark hair pulled back loosely, strands catching the light like threads of silk. Her hands cradled a steaming mug, and her eyes, those deep, quiet eyes, were fixed on the garden beyond, where frost still clung to the rose bushes like shattered glass. Alexander's throat tightened. She looked older, yes, but not worn. There was a calm in her posture, a stillness he'd never seen before. Not during their marriage, not even in the early days when they laughed until their ribs ached. This was something else. Peace? Or just resignation? He knocked softly on the doorframe. She didn't startle, didn't flinch, as if she'd known he'd find her. "Good morning," he said, voice rougher than he intended. Clara turned slowly. Her expression didn't harden, didn't soften. It simply was like stone shaped by years of rain. "Alexander." Her voice was quiet, steady. "I wondered how long it would take you to notice." He stepped inside, hands shoved into his pockets like a boy caught doing something wrong. I didn't know you were still here." A faint smile touched her lips, sad, knowing. "You never asked." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the silence. Between them, "I assumed," he trailed off, because what could he say? That he assumed she'd vanished like everything else he'd treated as temporary? That he'd erased her from his mind the way one deletes an old file? Efficiently, without sentiment? Clara set her mug down and rose gracefully. "This place, it wasn't just a house to me. You knew that." "I do know that," he said quickly, stepping forward. "I do. But after everything, after the divorce, after him." He couldn't say their son's name. Not yet. Not here. The grief still lived in his bones like a splinter he refused to pull out. Clara's eyes flickered with pain, but she didn't look away. "You left, and I stayed. Not out of spite, not to haunt you, but because this is where I felt closest to him. To us, before we broke." Alexander swallowed hard. "You could have sold it, moved on, built something new." "And you?" she asked softly. "Did you build something new, Alexander? Or just taller walls?" He had no answer. Outside, a bird sang. A single clear note that cut through the tension like grace. Clara walked to the window again, her fingers brushing the cold glass. "I don't live in the main house anymore, just the gardener's cottage out back. I keep the gardens, tend to the orchard, restore the library shelves. It's enough. You've been here all this time," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "And I invited someone else into our home without even knowing you were still breathing in it." Clara turned, her gaze piercing. "Who did you bring?" He hesitated. Shame burned behind his ribs. "Her name is Livia. She's an artist. I told her the estate was empty, that it was just a quiet place to work." "A quiet place?" Clara repeated, almost to herself. Then, gently, "And what did you tell her about me?" "Nothing," he admitted. "I didn't think you'd be here. I didn't think about you at all." The honesty hung between them, raw and ugly. Clara exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight she'd carried for years. "Then you'll need to tell her the truth now, because this house remembers everything, Alexander. Even the things you try to forget." Before he could respond, the distant sound of laughter floated in from the front drive. Light, carefree. "Livia." Clara's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders shifted, just slightly, like a door closing. "She's here," Alexander said, panic threading his voice. "Yes," Clara said calmly. "And now you have a choice. Will you pretend again, or will you finally face what you left behind?" She moved past him toward the door, her steps silent on the wooden floor. Just before she disappeared into the hall, she paused. "I'm not your ghost, Alexander," she said without turning. "But if you keep treating people like they're temporary, you'll spend your whole life alone in a house full of echoes." Then she was gone. Alexander stood frozen, the warmth of the sunroom suddenly feeling like a cage. Outside, Livia's voice rang out again, bright, unaware, avoiding the thorns with the familiarity of someone who has made this same journey hundreds of times. From the dining room window, Alexander watched her, not daring to go out. Livia, oblivious to everything, leafed through an old book on the sofa, humming a melody that sounded too cheerful for the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the house. "Who is she?" Livia asked suddenly, without looking up from her book. but with such keen curiosity that it made Alexander shudder. She? The woman in the garden. I saw her from the window. She seems part of the place. As if the wind knew her. Alexander swallowed. She's a family friend. She looks after the property. And does he live here? Not exactly. Just help. Livia gently closed the book and looked at him for the first time with eyes that were no longer innocent, but inquisitive. Why do I feel you're lying to me, Alexander? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Meanwhile, Clara stopped in front of the small, ivy-covered gazebo, the same one where she used to read stories to her son when he was little. There, under that pergola, she had spent the first few weeks after his death, hugging a teddy bear that still smelled of his shampoo. No one knew she kept it in a drawer under the wooden bench. No one except her. She sat down, leaning her back against the cold wood, and closed her eyes. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the echo of childhood laughter that was no more. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Allowing herself to cry was allowing herself to remember. And remembering was staying alive. Can I sit down? Alexander's voice pulled her from her reverie. She wasn't surprised. She knew he would come sooner or later. Clara nodded without opening her eyes. He sat down beside her, leaving a prudent space between them, as if he feared that his presence might contaminate something sacred. I never asked you how you've been, he said, his voice softer than usual. I didn't expect you to, she replied, finally looking at him. Her eyes were moist, but steady. After all, you were the one who said that the past is useless for building the future. Alexander lowered his head. He remembered those words. He had said them in court, cold and calculating, as if pain were a variable that could be removed from an equation. I was wrong, he murmured. Yes, Clara said, without resentment, only certainty. You were broken, and instead of healing, you decided to bury everything, including me. There was a long silence, the kind of silence that hurts because it's filled with things left unsaid for years. Why didn't you leave? He finally asked, his voice breaking. You could have had a new life. Far from this, far from me. Clara gazed at the old apple tree at the far end of the garden, its branches twisted but still strong. Because this is where I was happiest, and also where I suffered the most. But I didn't want to leave it behind as if nothing had mattered. Our son was born here. He took his first steps here. He died here. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued. If I left, I felt like I was abandoning him again. Alexander felt as if his chest had filled with shards of glass. They hadn't spoken about their son since the funeral. He had run away from the pain. She had hugged him until she bled. I'm sorry, she whispered. And this time it wasn't an empty apology. It was a stifled cry, a belated acknowledgement of everything that had gone wrong. Clara stared at him for a long time, as if she were deciding if there was still anything left in him worth saving. I don't need you to apologize, Alexander, she finally said. I need you to understand that people aren't hobbies, or projects, or memories you keep in a drawer until it suits you to bring them out. At that moment, Livia appeared on the path leading to the gazebo. She stopped when she saw them, uncomfortable, as if she had interrupted something intimate and sacred. Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you, he said, taking a step back. Clara stood up calmly. You're not bothering me. On the contrary, perhaps you need to hear this too. She approached Livia and extended her hand, not with superiority, but with empathy. My name is Clara. I was his wife, and although I'm no longer his wife, I'm still part of this story. As you, perhaps, are too, if you decide not to repeat the same mistakes. Livia looked at Alexander, then at Clara, and in her eyes shone a sudden understanding, painful and liberating at the same time. Alexander stood up, trembling. For the first time in years, he was out of control. He had no excuses. He only had the truth before him, naked and demanding. And the wind, like a silent witness, carried away the question that no one dared to ask. Alexander opened his mouth to explain, to justify, to do something. But Clara spoke first, her voice low but steady, like the hum of an old piano string. "You called her your little hobby, didn't you?" she asked, not unkindly, but with the quiet precision of someone who had long since stopped needing illusions. Livia flinched almost imperceptibly. She hadn't heard those words from Alexander's lips, not directly, but the phrase had slipped out in a phone call weeks ago, careless and casual, while he arranged her stay. She'd pretended not to notice. Now, hearing it confirmed by this woman who carried grief like grace, felt like being stripped bare in public. "I didn't mean it like that," Alexander said quickly, turning to Livia. "It was just a stupid way of saying I admired your work, your freedom. You thought I wouldn't get attached," Livia finished for him, her voice trembling but clear. "Because you never do." Clara watched them both, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply saw them. The tycoon hiding behind charm, the artist mistaking attention for affection. And in that moment, she felt not anger, but sorrow. For all of them. "I invited you here because I needed silence," Alexander admitted, running a hand through his hair. "And you painted like you understood silence, like you weren't afraid of it." Livia let out a bitter laugh. "So I was your muse for loneliness? Your temporary cure for emptiness?" "I didn't plan for this," he said, gesturing helplessly toward Clara, toward the house, toward the weight of everything he'd ignored. "No one ever does," Clara murmured. A gust of wind swept through the garden, rustling the hedges and sending a flurry of dried leaves spiraling around their feet. Somewhere in the distance, a gate creaked on its hinges. Lonely, persistent. Livia looked from Alexander to Clara, then back again. "You never told me she was still here. You never told me anything real." "I was trying to protect you," Alexander said, though even he heard how hollow it sounded. "From what?" Livia challenged. "From the truth? Or from having to face your own past?" He had no answer. Clara stepped forward, not toward him but toward Livia. "You're young," she said gently, "and talented, and you deserve more than to be someone's distraction while they run from their ghosts." Livia's eyes filled, but she held Clara's gaze. "I thought I was helping him find peace." "You can't give someone peace if they haven't first faced their storm," Clara replied. "And his storm, it's been waiting for him here all along." Alexander stood frozen, the words cutting deeper than any accusation. Because she was right. He hadn't brought Livia here to share beauty. He'd brought her to fill the silence he couldn't bear, to make the house feel less like a tomb. "I should go," Livia whispered, already stepping back toward the path. "No, wait." Alexander reached for her, but stopped himself mid-gesture, hand hovering in the air like a question mark. "Please, let me explain." "There's nothing left to explain," she said softly. "You don't even know who you are when you're not performing. And I don't want to be part of the act anymore." She turned and walked away, her steps quick but not frantic. Resolute. The kind of departure that doesn't slam doors, but closes them with finality. Alexander watched her go, his chest hollow, as if something vital had just slipped through his fingers. He wanted to chase her, to beg. But what would he say? That he'd change? He hadn't changed in 7 years. Why would she believe him now? Only when Livia disappeared around the corner of the ivy-covered wall did he finally look at Clara. "She didn't deserve this," he said hoarsely. "No one does," Clara replied. "But we all end up here anyway, standing in the wreckage of someone else's avoidance." He sank onto the bench beneath the pergola, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just didn't know how to be here. Not after losing him. Not after losing us." Clara sat beside him, not close, but near enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence, like a fire banked but not extinguished. "You don't have to be perfect to stay," she said quietly. "You just have to be honest." He looked up at her, eyes raw. "What if I don't know how to be honest anymore?" "Then start small," she said. "Tell me why you really came back." He hesitated. The truth felt dangerous, like opening a wound that had scabbed over but never healed. Because last week, he began, voice barely above a whisper. I stood in my penthouse overlooking the city, surrounded by everything money could buy, and I realized I hadn't laughed in years. Not real laughter. Not the kind that comes from your bones. And the last time I felt whole was here, with you, even in the pain. Clara didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened, a crack in the armor. Outside, the sky darkened. Clouds gathered with quiet urgency. Rain was coming. 2:22 p.m. the first drops of rain began to fall just as Livia reappeared. Not from the direction of the house, but from the old stone path that wound through the orchard. She carried a small canvas under her arm, damp at the edges, and her hair clung to her cheeks in dark strands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now, cleared by resolve. Alexander stood abruptly, heart hammering. Livia, I thought you'd left. I almost did, she said, voice steady but edged with something new. Clarity, perhaps, or quiet courage. But I forgot my sketchbook in the library, and I needed to say something before I go. Not to you. She turned to Clara. To you. Clara rose slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. You don't owe me anything. But I do, Livia said, stepping closer. Because you saw me for what I was becoming, a mirror for his loneliness, and you didn't mock me. You warned me, and that was kindness. A silence settled between them, fragile as wet paper. Alexander watched, stunned, as two women, one shaped by loss, the other by hope, stood facing each other not as rivals, but as witnesses to the same truth. I painted you this morning, Livia said suddenly, holding out the canvas. Before I knew who you were, I saw you in the garden, tending the roses, and there was such stillness in you, like you'd made peace with something most people spend their lives running from. Clara took the painting with careful hands. It showed her in profile, sunlight catching the silver strands in her hair, one hand resting on the trunk of the old apple tree, the one where their son had carved his initials years ago. The brushstrokes were tender, reverent. You captured him? Clara whispered, tears welling again, but this time they fell freely. Not just me, him. In the way I hold myself near that tree. Livia nodded, voice softening. I didn't know his name, but I felt his absence like a presence. Alexander's breath caught. He hadn't even noticed the tree in the painting at first, but now he saw it. The faint outline of tiny letters carved into the bark. El Ethan Langford. Their boy. Gone at 6 years old, taken by fever before modern medicine could catch up. He stepped forward, drawn by a gravity he couldn't resist. You painted our son's memory, without ever knowing him. I painted what the place told me, Livia said simply. This estate doesn't whisper, it sings, if you're willing to listen. Rain fell harder now, pattering on the leaves above them, drumming a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat returning. Clara looked from the painting to Alexander, then to Livia. Stay for the storm, she said unexpectedly. Not for him, for yourself. You've earned the right to sit in this truth a while. Livia hesitated, glancing at Alexander with wary eyes. I don't want to be part of whatever comes next between you two. You won't be, Clara assured her. But you're already part of this house's story now. And stories like this, they need witnesses. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and resonant, as if the sky itself agreed. Livia exhaled, then nodded. Just until the rain stops. They moved toward the covered veranda together. 3 figures walking side by side. Not as lovers, not as enemies, but as strangers bound by the same unspoken grief. Inside, the fire in the hearth had been lit. Clara must have done it while they spoke, and its warmth wrapped around them like an old blanket. Alexander sank into an armchair, watching the 2 women stand by the window, rain streaking the glass behind them. He felt like an intruder in his own life, watching scenes unfold that he'd missed for years. Why did you really come back, Livia? He asked suddenly, unable to hold the question in. She turned, arms crossed but not defensively. Because you said this place was empty, and artists are drawn to emptiness. It's where we find space to create. But I didn't expect it to be full of ghosts. Or love that never died. Just got buried. Her words struck him like stones dropped into deep water, ripples spreading through every lie he'd told himself. Clara poured tea into 3 cups. Chamomile, the same blend she always used, and handed one to Livia, then placed the third on the table beside Alexander without a word. He picked it up, fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. Neither pulled away immediately. Outside, lightning flashed, brief, brilliant, and in that instant, all 3 faces were illuminated. One marked by regret, one by awakening, and one by quiet endurance. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Not reconciliation, not yet, danced like memories across the walls. Alexander sat with his untouched tea growing cold. His eyes fixed on Clara as she stood by the window, her silhouette framed by lightning. Livia remained near the bookshelf, arms loosely crossed, watching them both. Not with judgment now, but with the quiet intensity of someone witnessing a reckoning long overdue. Then, without warning, Clara turned from the window and walked straight to the grand piano in the corner of the room, the one Alexander hadn't touched since Ethan was alive. She lifted the lid with a soft creak, revealing ivory keys yellowed by time. Her fingers hovered above them, trembling slightly. "I played for him every night," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Even after he fell asleep. I thought, if I kept playing, he'd still hear me somewhere." Alexander's throat tightened. He remembered those nights, the lullabies drifting down the hall, the way Clara would sit for hours after, just staring at the closed door of their son's room. Now she pressed a single key. A low C resonated through the room, pure and haunting. And then she spoke, not to Livia, not even really to Alexander, but to the silence between them. "You left the day after the funeral," she said. "You signed the papers from your office in Geneva. You didn't come back for his birthday, or the anniversary, or any of the 1,000 little moments that kept him alive in my heart." Alexander flinched as if struck. "I couldn't." "Don't," she cut in, turning to face him fully, eyes blazing with restrained pain. "Don't say you couldn't. You wouldn't, because facing it meant admitting you weren't in control. And Alexander Langford doesn't do grief. He does deals. He does exits. He does hobbies." The word hung in the air like smoke. Livia looked down, ashamed, not for herself, but for how easily she'd been folded into his pattern of escape. "I came back because I thought I could fix it," Alexander said hoarsely, rising to his feet. "Not the past, not Ethan, but us, or what was left." "There is no us," Clara replied, but her voice wavered. "There hasn't been for years, but there is this place, and there's the truth. And right now you're standing in both, and still trying to negotiate your way out." He took a step toward her. "Then tell me what you want me to do." "Stay," she said simply. "Not as the Tycoon, not as the ex-husband. Just stay. Be here. Feel it. All of it. The guilt, the love, the loss. Don't run this time." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. Livia finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "She's right. You keep treating people like temporary solutions to permanent wounds. But wounds don't heal in the dark, Alexander. They fester." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not disappointment, but compassion, and that hurt more than anger ever could. "I don't know how to be here," he admitted, voice breaking. "Every time I walk these halls, I see him, his shoes by the door, his drawings on the fridge. I hear his laugh in the echo of this house, and it destroys me." Clara's eyes filled again, but she didn't look away. "Then let it destroy you. Let it break you open, because maybe, just maybe, something real can grow in the cracks." A long silence followed, thick with unshed tears and the drumming rain. Then, slowly, Alexander walked to the piano. He didn't sit. He just stood beside Clara, close enough to feel the warmth of her arm, but not touching. "I remember the song you played the night before he got sick," he said quietly. "Claire de Lune. You said it reminded you of moonlight on his face when he slept." Clara nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Without another word, Alexander sat on the bench. He wasn't a pianist. He'd never learned. But he placed his hands on the keys and pressed down gently, clumsily, mimicking the opening notes as best he could from memory. The sound was imperfect, halting, but honest. Clara watched him, stunned. Livia leaned against the door frame, eyes glistening. And in that broken melody, something shifted. Not resolution, not yet, but the first fragile note of a new beginning. Clara didn't move. She simply watched him, as if seeing him for the first time not as the man who left, but as the man who had just begun to return. Livia, still by the doorway, exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath through the entire scene. She stepped forward, not toward Alexander, but toward the fireplace, where an old wooden box sat half-hidden beneath a crocheted shawl. "May I?" she asked softly, glancing at Clara. Clara nodded, eyes still on Alexander. "It's yours to see." Livia lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of letters, dozens of them, tied with faded blue ribbon. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly blurred in places, as if touched by tears. "These are letters I wrote," Clara said, voice low. "Every year on Ethan's birthday, and on our wedding anniversary, and sometimes, just when the silence got too loud. I never sent them. I didn't know where you were, or if you'd even care." Alexander turned slowly, his gaze falling on the box like it contained a ghost. "You wrote to me?" "Not to the Tycoon," Clara said, stepping closer. "To the man I married. The one who used to read poetry to me under the stars. The one who cried when Ethan took his first step. That man. I wasn't sure he still existed, but I wrote to him anyway, in case he ever came back." Her words landed like stones in still water, each ripple cutting deeper than the last. Livia carefully lifted the top letter. The date read, June 12th, 5 years after the divorce. She looked at Clara, then at Alexander, and without asking, began to read aloud, softly, respectfully. "If you're reading this, it means you've finally come home. Not to the house, but to yourself. I don't know if you remember how you used to hold my hand when we walked through the orchard. Like you were afraid I'd vanish. You weren't wrong to be afraid. We all vanish eventually. But love? Real love doesn't disappear. It just waits, quietly, in the places we refuse to look." Alexander's breath hitched. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass as if trying to escape the ache in his chest. "I don't deserve these," he whispered. "No," Clara said gently, "but you needed to hear them." Livia placed the letter back and closed the box. "You didn't just lose a son," she said to Alexander, her voice thick with empathy. "You lost yourself trying to outrun the pain, and you made everyone around you pay for it, even when you thought you were protecting them." He turned, eyes glistening. "I thought success would fill the hole, power, control, but the more I built, the emptier I felt, like I was constructing a monument to everything I'd failed." Clara walked to him then, not with anger, but with sorrow so deep it shimmered like light on water. "You promised me the night before the funeral that you'd stay, that we'd grieve together, that we'd keep his memory alive together. But you vanished before the earth had even settled over his grave." "I was broken," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know how to be anything but shattered." "And I was shattered too," Clara replied. "But I chose to stay in the pieces, to tend to them, to let them mean something. You chose to pretend they never existed." Outside, the rain had nearly stopped. A single bird called from the garden, a tentative, hopeful sound. Alexander sank to his knees, not in surrender, but in recognition. "I'm so sorry, Clara, not just for leaving, for making you carry it all alone, for treating our love like it was disposable, for calling Livia a hobby, like people are things to be used and put away." Clara knelt beside him, not touching him, but close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. "You can't undo the past, Alexander, but you can stop repeating it." Livia watched them, her heart aching not with jealousy, but with the bittersweet understanding that some wounds are too deep for new love to heal. They must be faced by the ones who made them. "I think I'll go now," she said quietly. "Not because I'm hurt, but because this is yours to mend. And I won't stand in the way of that." Alexander looked up at her, eyes full of gratitude and regret. "Thank you for seeing me, even when I didn't want to be seen." She offered a small, sad smile. "Maybe one day you'll paint your own truth. Until then, take care of her. And yourself." With that, she picked up her satchel and the small canvas of Clara in the garden, and walked out into the damp twilight. Alexander sat on the floor beside the piano. Clara's letters spread around him like fallen leaves. He held one in his hands, dated just 3 months ago, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. His eyes moved slowly over the words, each sentence a quiet earthquake beneath his ribs. "Today I found one of Ethan's toy cars under the porch. Rusty, wheels stuck. I cleaned it and put it on his shelf. I talk to him sometimes, not prayers, just updates. The roses bloomed early this year. I fixed the leak in the library roof. It helps. Not because I think he hears me, but because it reminds me that love doesn't end when life does." Alexander's breath caught. He hadn't known she still spoke to their son. He hadn't known anything, because he'd never stayed long enough to find out. Clara stood by the window again, arms wrapped around herself, watching the last streaks of twilight bleed into indigo. She didn't look at him, didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air, the way grief was no longer running, but finally standing still. "You kept everything," he said hoarsely, voice raw from unshed tears. "I kept him," she corrected softly. "Not for you. For me. And maybe for the day you'd be ready to remember him without collapsing." He looked up at her, eyes glistening. "I thought if I forgot, it would hurt less." "And did it?" she asked, turning now, her gaze steady, luminous with sorrow and something else. Something fragile, like hope wrapped in caution. "No," he admitted. "It just made me feel like a stranger in my own life." A silence settled between them, not empty, but full of memory, of regret, of the ghost of a little boy who loved dinosaurs and strawberry pancakes and falling asleep with his hand tucked in his mother's. Then, from the hallway, a soft creak. They both turned. Livia stood in the doorway, not leaving after all. Her coat was on, but her bag rested at her feet. "I couldn't go," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Not yet." Alexander rose. Slowly. "You don't have to stay out of pity." "It's not pity," she said, stepping inside. "It's clarity. I realized something while walking to the gate. You didn't bring me here to fill a void, Alexander. You brought me here because part of you wanted to be caught, to be seen doing the wrong thing, because deep down you were tired of pretending." He stared at her, stunned. "Is that true? Ask yourself," Clara said gently. "Why did you choose this estate? Why not your villa in Tuscany? Or your penthouse in New York? Why come back to the one place that holds every truth you've been avoiding?" Alexander looked around, at the faded wallpaper, the bookshelf Ethan used to climb, the dent in the floorboard where he dropped his marble collection. This wasn't just a house. It was a living archive of everything he'd lost, and everything he'd abandoned. "I came back," he whispered, "because I needed someone to remind me that I'm still capable of feeling something real." Livia walked to the center of the room, her presence calm but undeniable. "Then stop treating people like they're temporary. Clara isn't your past to be revisited when convenient. I'm not your future to be curated. We're both just human, flawed, present." Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "And Ethan wasn't just a memory to be locked away. He was our son, and he deserved to be remembered, not mourned in silence, but honored in the way we live." Alexander sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. "I don't know how to start." "You already have," Livia said. "By staying, by reading those letters, by playing that terrible rendition of Claire de Lune." A faint, broken laugh escaped him. "It was terrible, but it was honest," Clara said, and for the first time, The corners of her mouth lifted, just slightly. And honesty is where healing begins. Outside, the clouds parted. A sliver of moonlight spilled through the trees, silvering the wet grass. Livia picked up her bag again, but this time, there was peace in her movements. I'll leave tomorrow morning, but tonight, let me stay. Not as your hobby, not as anything, just as a witness. Because stories like yours, they need to be seen through to the end. Alexander looked at her, then at Clara, and in that moment, he didn't see two women vying for his attention. He saw two mirrors, one reflecting who he'd been, the other showing who he might become. And for the first time in years, he didn't look away. "Stay," he said simply. And in the quiet that followed, beneath the watchful moon and the weight of unsent letters, room. No longer strangers, not quite family, but bound now by something deeper than words. The fire had been rekindled, small flames licking at dry logs, casting warm light over Clara's face as she reached into the wooden box and pulled out a single envelope, older than the rest, its edges frayed. The ink faded to a soft brown. "This one," she said quietly. "I wrote the night you left." Alexander's breath stilled. He didn't reach for it, didn't dare. "You don't have to read it." "I think I do," she said. "And I think you need to hear it." Livia sat cross-legged on the rug nearby, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide with reverence, as if witnessing a sacred rite. Clara unfolded the letter with careful hands, as though it might crumble into dust. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, but beneath it trembled the ghost of a woman who had once loved too deeply to survive intact. Asterisk, "Dear Alexander, you're gone before dawn even breaks. I heard your car pull away an hour ago. I didn't come downstairs. Couldn't. Because if I saw you leave, if I watched you drive away from everything we built, I think my heart would have stopped right there on the stairs. Do you remember the day we brought Ethan home from the hospital? You held him so gently, like he was made of glass. You whispered, 'We'll never let anything hurt him.' And I believed you. We both did. But life doesn't ask permission before it breaks us. And grief doesn't care how strong you are. It only asks if you're willing to feel it. You're running because you think strength means silence. But real strength is staying, even when it hurts, especially then. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, please know, I'm not angry. I'm just unbearably sad. For you, for me, for the boy who deserved parents who could hold each other up instead of falling apart. Come back when you're ready to grieve him with me, not as a memory to bury, but as a love to carry." Clara asterisk silence followed. Thick, aching, holy. Alexander sat frozen, tears streaming down his face unchecked. He hadn't cried since the funeral, hadn't allowed himself to, but now, the dam had broken, and years of suppressed sorrow poured out in ragged breaths and trembling shoulders. "I didn't know you felt that way," he choked out. "I thought you blamed me." "I did blame you," Clara admitted, her own eyes wet. "For weeks, months. But then I realized you weren't running from me. You were running from the part of yourself that couldn't fix it. And that I could understand." Livia wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "You both loved him so much," she whispered. "That's why it destroyed you." Alexander looked at Clara, really looked, at the lines around her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture, the way she still wore Ethan's tiny silver bracelet on her wrist, hidden under her sleeve. "I tried to forget because remembering felt like drowning, and I stayed because forgetting felt like betrayal," Clara replied softly. Outside, an owl called, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo the unspoken truth hanging in the air. They had both been drowning, just in different oceans. Then, slowly, Alexander rose and walked to the far bookshelf, the one Ethan used to climb like a jungle gym. He knelt and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside lay a small, worn stuffed elephant, one ear chewed, its fur matted with time. He held it to his chest like a relic. "I kept this in my office safe for years," he said, voice breaking. "I take it out sometimes when no one was watching, just to smell it. It still had his shampoo on it." For the longest time, Clara stood and walked to him, kneeling beside him on the rug. She didn't touch him, but she didn't look away either. "You can say his name now," she said gently. "Out loud. In this house. He belongs here." Alexander closed his eyes, took a shuddering breath. "Ethan," he whispered, then louder, "Ethan." Clara remained beside him, not touching, but close enough that her presence was a quiet anchor in the storm of his grief. Livia stayed by the fire, watching them with eyes that saw not just pain, but the raw, trembling birth of something new, something like redemption. Then, slowly, Alexander turned to Clara, his voice hoarse but clear. "All this time, I thought you moved on, that you found peace without me. But you were here, holding it all together, while I was out there building empires out of smoke." "I didn't move on," Clara said softly. "I moved through. There's a difference." He looked down at the elephant, tracing the frayed stitching with his thumb. "I became someone I don't recognize. Cold, calculating. I started calling people assets or distractions. Even myself. Like emotions were liabilities to be managed." "You stopped seeing people as people," Livia said from across the room, her voice gentle but firm. "You saw them as functions. Comfort, inspiration, escape. Even me. You didn't invite me here because you cared about me. You invited me because I made your emptiness feel artistic." Alexander winced. "That's true, and I hate that it's true. But now you see it," Clara said. "That's the first real step." He looked up at her, eyes searching. Do you think I can ever be the man you married again?" Clara didn't answer right away. She rose and walked to the window, where the moonlight painted silver streaks across the wet grass. "That man isn't gone," she said at last. "He's just buried under layers of fear and pride. But you have to dig for him yourself. No one can do it for you." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine, Ethan's favorite. He used to say it smelled like magic cookies. Alexander stood, still holding the elephant, and walked to the grand staircase. The same one Ethan had tumbled down laughing, the same one he'd carried him up when he was feverish and burning with illness. "I spent years believing success would fill the hole he left," Alexander said, voice trembling. "But the more I achieved, the more I felt like a ghost in my own life. Smiling for cameras, signing deals, sleeping in penthouses that echoed like tombs. I didn't even know I was lonely, because I'd convinced myself I didn't need anyone. And yet," Clara said, turning to face him, "you came back here, to the one place that holds everything you tried to forget. Because part of me remembered," he whispered, "even when I didn't want to. This house, it's not just stone and wood. It's the only place I ever felt real." Livia stood and walked toward them, stopping a few feet away. "You're not alone in that," she said. "People spend their whole lives chasing validation, thinking it'll make them feel seen. But being seen isn't about applause. It's about being known. In your mess, your grief, your broken promises, and still being allowed to stay." Alexander looked at her, then at Clara, and for the first time he didn't see judgment. He saw witnesses, companions in the dark. "I don't know how to rebuild," he admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with honesty," Clara said. "Not grand gestures, not apologies wrapped in guilt. Just show up, every day, even when it hurts." He nodded slowly, then walked to the piano again. This time he didn't fumble. He placed the stuffed elephant gently on the bench, then sat and played the opening notes of Moonlight. Not perfectly, but with intention. With memory, the melody filled the room. Tentative, tender, full of longing. Clara closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Livia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, heart full. And in that moment, beneath the watchful moon and the weight of unspoken years, Alexander Langford didn't try to fix anything. He simply let himself feel, and in doing so began to return to himself. The music swelled, soft and aching. Moonlight darkened in seconds as black clouds rolled in from the west like an omen. Clara frowned, stepping toward the window. That's not right. The storm was over. As if in answer, thunder cracked, sharp, violent, shaking the very foundations of the manor. A gust slammed against the house, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the fire remained, casting long, leaping shadows across the walls. Livia gasped softly. Did it knock out the power? Before anyone could answer, rain began to fall. Not gently, but in heavy, pounding sheets, drumming against the roof like fists demanding entry. Alexander stood abruptly, the stuffed elephant still in his hand. The old generators in the east wing. It hasn't been used in years. I'll go with you, Clara said, already moving toward the hall closet where she kept flashlights. No, he said quickly. Stay here. I'll manage. She turned, her face half lit by the firelight, eyes steady. You don't know where the fuse box is anymore, or how the shutters lock during storms. This is my home too, Alexander. Let me help. He hesitated, old instincts warring with new humility. Then he nodded. All right. Livia wrapped her arms around herself. I'll stay by the fire. Keep it going. They moved through the house in near darkness, guided only by the beam of Clara's flashlight. Rain lashed the windows. Wind howled through the eaves like a voice from another time. In the hallway, a portrait of Ethan, 6 years old, grinning with missing front teeth, swayed on its hook. Alexander reached out instinctively to steady it, fingers brushing the frame as if afraid it might vanish. He loved storms, Clara said quietly, watching him, used to press his nose to the glass and count the lightning strikes. Alexander's throat tightened. I forgot that. You forgot a lot, she said, not unkindly. But you're remembering now. They reached the utility room. Alexander fumbled with the generator switch, hands unsteady. Nothing happened. Try the breaker first, Clara said, shining the light on the panel. It's probably tripped from the surge. He flipped the switch. A spark. A hum. Then nothing. It's dead, he muttered, frustration edging his voice. Just like everything else I touch. Clara stepped closer. Then we'll wait it out. Together. He looked at her. Really looked, and saw not the woman he'd abandoned, but the one who'd stayed, who'd held their son's memory like a flame in the dark. Outside, the storm raged harder. A tree branch scraped against the roof like fingernails on glass. And then, a sound that froze them both. A child's laugh. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Alexander went rigid. Did you? Clara's breath caught. She didn't speak, just nodded slowly, eyes wide. It came again, softer this time, like an echo bouncing off the walls of memory. Livia appeared in the doorway, pale but calm. I heard it too. Silence fell, thick and trembling. It's the wind, Alexander whispered, though he didn't believe it. Maybe, Clara said, or maybe the house is reminding us that love doesn't leave. It just waits for us to be quiet enough to hear it. Thunder boomed, shaking the walls. The temperature dropped suddenly, breath visible in the air. And in that moment, trapped between storm and silence, past and present, none of them moved. None of them spoke. Because for the first time, they weren't running from grief, from truth, from each other. They were simply there, together. The storm raged outside, but inside the utility room, time seemed to hold its breath. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 impatient hands, yet the three of them stood frozen, not in fear, but in awe, as if the house itself had just spoken. Alexander's chest rose and fell unevenly. He leaned against the cold stone wall, eyes closed, as if trying to trap that sound, the laugh, inside his memory before it vanished again. I heard him, he whispered, voice raw. I really heard him. Clara didn't deny it, didn't rationalize it away. She simply stepped closer, her voice barely audible over the thunder. He's always been here, not as a ghost, but as love that never left. Livia wrapped her arms tighter around herself, not from cold, but from the weight of something sacred unfolding before her. Some places don't let go of the people they loved, she said softly. Maybe he's been waiting for you to come back. Alexander opened his eyes, tears glistening in the dim glow of the flashlight. All these years, I thought if I came back, I'd drown in grief. But instead, it feels like he's reaching for me. Clara reached out then, not to touch him, but to rest her hand on the same portrait frame he'd steadied earlier, now hanging crooked in the hallway behind them. He didn't blame you for leaving, Alexander. Children don't carry that kind of anger. He just missed you. Those words struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Because they weren't laced with blame, they were wrapped in grace. And grace, Alexander realized, was the one thing he hadn't allowed himself to believe he deserved. He sank to his knees right there in the narrow hallway, the stuffed elephant still clutched in his hand. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, not just to Clara, not just to Livia, but to the silence, to the house, to the boy whose name he'd buried under boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay. I'm sorry I made you carry it all alone. I'm sorry I forgot how to love without conditions." Clara knelt beside him. This time, she did touch him, just her fingers brushing his wrist, light as a feather, but grounding as an anchor. "You don't have to be strong," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "You just have to be honest. And you are. Right now. That's enough." Livia watched them, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "You're not broken," she said gently. "You're human, and humans aren't meant to carry grief alone." Outside, the wind shifted. The rain softened from a roar to a murmur, as if the storm had delivered its message and was now retreating. In the quiet that followed, Alexander looked up at Clara. Really looked, and saw not the wife he'd lost, but the woman who had stayed true to their love even when he hadn't. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I need you to know, I see you now. See what you've done, what you've held, and I won't look away again." Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't look down. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment," she said. "It's a path, and maybe we can walk it together, not as who we were, but as who we're becoming." A long silence settled between them, warm despite the chill in the air. Then, from deep within the house, a soft creak, a door closing, or opening. No one jumped, no one spoke, because they all felt it. The presence wasn't frightening. It was familiar, like a hand on your shoulder when you're crying in the dark. Alexander stood slowly, helping Clara up. Their fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Not out of romance, but recognition. Livia smiled through her tears. "Whatever happens next, it's yours to write, together." And as the firelight flickered down the hall, casting their shadows long and intertwined, the storm finally passed, leaving behind not wreckage but clarity. They walked back to the drawing room in silence, the only sound their footsteps and the gentle drip of rain from the eaves. But inside, something had shifted forever. Not because the past was fixed. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Alexander sat on the rug by the hearth, still holding the stuffed elephant, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. Clara stood at the kitchen doorway, cradling 2 mugs of tea, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Tenderness, perhaps, or cautious hope. Livia was already packed. She stood near the front door, satchel slung over her shoulder, her small canvas of Clara in the garden tucked under her arm. She hadn't made a sound while gathering her things. She'd moved like someone who knew when to leave, not out of hurt, but out of respect for what was unfolding between 2 souls who needed space to heal. Alexander looked up as she approached. "You're leaving." "I am," she said softly. "Not because I don't care, but because I do." He rose slowly, setting the elephant gently on the piano bench. "I never meant to use you." "I know," she said, and the kindness in her voice nearly undid him. "But you did, and that's okay because you saw it. You named it. That's more than most people ever do." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets like a man unsure of his place. "Will I see you again?" She smiled. A real one this time, warm and unguarded. "Maybe, but not as your hobby, not as your muse, If we meet again, it'll be as two whole people, not two halves trying to fill each other's cracks. He nodded, throat tight. Thank you for not walking away angry. I'm not angry, she said, glancing toward Clara, who now stood quietly in the hall listening. I'm grateful. You both showed me what real love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. Clara walked forward then, holding out a small wrapped parcel tied with twine. For you, she said. It's from the orchard. Livia took it, surprised. What is it? A cutting from the apple tree, the one Ethan loved. It's rooted now. If you plant it somewhere with good light and patience, it'll grow. Tears welled in Livia's eyes. She pressed the bundle to her chest. I'll take care of it. You already have, Clara said gently, just by seeing us. A long silence settled, filled only by the distant call of a morning bird and the soft creak of the old house settling into peace. Then Livia turned to Alexander one last time. Don't call it a second chance, she said. Call it a choice. Every day choose to stay, choose to feel, choose to remember. That's how you honor him. That's how you heal. He swallowed hard. I will. She reached out and squeezed his forearm, brief, firm, full of quiet faith. Then, without another word, she opened the front door and stepped into the dew-drenched morning. They watched her go from the porch, Clara beside Alexander, close enough that their sleeves brushed. As Livia walked down the gravel path, her silhouette growing smaller against the rising sun. When she disappeared around the bend, Alexander exhaled deeply, as if releasing a breath he'd held for years. I should have treated her better, he murmured. You will, Clara said, because now you know the cost of treating people like they're temporary. He turned to her, the morning light catching the unshed tears in his eyes. And you? Do you think you can ever trust me again? Clara didn't answer right away. She looked out at the garden, the roses glistening with rain, the apple tree standing tall, its branches heavy with promise. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. Not for the past, for whatever comes next. Inside the house, the grandfather clock chimed, soft, steady, marking time not as something lost, but as something given. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the stone steps beneath their feet, Alexander didn't reach for her hand. He simply stood beside her, present, of the kind of quiet that only comes when two people stop performing and simply exist together. Alexander lingered on the porch long after Clara had gone inside, his eyes fixed on the path where Livia had vanished. The morning air smelled of wet earth and blooming jasmine, Ethan's magic cookies, as he used to call them. The scent tugged at something deep in Alexander's chest, tender and aching. He turned and stepped back into the house, drawn not by habit, but by a pull he couldn't name. Clara was in the kitchen, rinsing teacups, her movements calm, rhythmic. She didn't look up as he entered, but she knew he was there. She always had. I need to see it, he said suddenly, voice rough. She paused, water still running over porcelain. His room. He nodded, though she couldn't see him. I haven't been inside since the day we brought him home from the hospital for the last time. Clara turned off the tap and dried her hands slowly, deliberately. It's just as he left it. I know, he whispered. That's why I've been afraid. She walked to him then, stopping an arm's length away. You don't have to go alone. He looked into her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes that had witnessed his best and worst, and for the first time he didn't flinch. Will you come with me? She nodded. They climbed the stairs together, their footsteps muffled by the old carpet runner. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself were holding its breath. At the end of the hall, a door stood closed, painted sky blue, just as Ethan had chosen when he was 5. A small wooden sign hung crookedly. Ethan's kingdom enter only if you bring cookies. Alexander reached for the knob, hand trembling. He turned it slowly. The door opened with a soft creak. Sunlight streamed through the half-drawn curtains, illuminating dust dancing in golden beams. Everything was exactly as it had been 7 years ago. The dinosaur bedspread, the bookshelf overflowing with picture books, the toy train frozen mid-track on the rug. On the desk sat a half-finished drawing, a rocket ship with wings, labeled, "For Mom and Dad to fly to the stars." Alexander stepped inside, his breath catching like glass in his throat. He knelt beside the bed and picked up a small stuffed lion, Ethan's bedtime guardian. Its fur was worn smooth from tiny hands clutching it every night. "He used to whisper secrets to this thing," Alexander murmured, voice breaking. "Said it kept the monsters away." Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, tears silently tracing her cheeks. "He believed you'd come tuck him in every night. Even when you stopped coming, he'd leave the light on, just in case." Alexander's shoulders shook. He pressed the lion to his chest, as if trying to absorb the warmth of a love that had never stopped waiting for him. "I thought forgetting would protect me," he said, voice raw. But all it did was steal more time with him, even in memory. Clara walked in and knelt beside him. She didn't touch him, but she placed her hand on the edge of the bed, right where Ethan's feet used to rest. "He's not gone, Alexander," she said softly. "He's in every choice we make now, in how we love, in how we stay." Alexander looked around the room. The crayon drawings taped to the walls, the mismatched socks under the dresser, the tiny shoes lined up by the closet like soldiers at attention. This wasn't just a child's bedroom. It was a sanctuary of pure, unguarded love. And he had abandoned it. But not today. Today he stayed. He reached for Clara's hand, not out of romance but reverence, and she let him take it. Their fingers intertwined over the edge of the bed, two broken halves finally choosing to face the whole truth. Outside, birds sang. The world moved on. But in this room, time stood still, not in grief, but in grace. And for the first time since his son's death, Alexander Langford didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. Then, from the corner of the room, something caught his eye. Tucked beneath the toy chest, a small wooden box he'd never seen before, carved with clumsy letters. "Dad's stuff." His breath hitched. "Did you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Clara followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "He made it the week before he got sick. Said he was collecting things, for when Dad feels sad." Her voice trembled. "I found it after, and I couldn't bring myself to open it. I thought, maybe one day you'd be ready." Alexander released her hand gently and crawled toward the box, heart hammering like it might break free from his ribs. He lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside lay three things: a smooth river stone painted with a wobbly yellow sun, a folded piece of notebook paper, edges frayed, and a tiny plastic astronaut, missing one arm, but grinning bravely. He unfolded the paper. In Ethan's uneven handwriting, it read, "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, you must be feeling blue. That's okay. Mom says even big people cry. But don't forget, you're my hero. And heroes keep going. I left you my best rock. It glows in the dark. And my space guy, he's brave like you. Love you to the moon and back." Ethan Alexander crumpled forward, shoulders shaking, the note pressed to his lips as if he could kiss the words and bring them, and him, back to life. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "I didn't know he saw me that way, after everything. All the times I missed bedtime, all the calls I took instead of playing. He still thought I was his hero." Clara knelt beside him again, her own tears falling freely now. "He loved you unconditionally, Alexander. Not because you were perfect, but because you were his." He turned to her, eyes red-rimmed, raw with revelation. "All this time I thought I failed him, but he never stopped believing in me." "You didn't fail him," she said softly, brushing a tear from his cheek with her thumb. An old gesture, instinctive, tender. "You just got lost. And that's human." Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of jasmine through the open window. For a moment, it almost felt like a presence, gentle, forgiving, full of quiet joy. Alexander looked around the room again, really seeing it now, not as a tomb of grief, but as a testament to pure, unguarded love. The kind that doesn't demand perfection. The kind that waits. Want to stay, he said suddenly, turning to Clara with fierce clarity. Not just today, not just for nostalgia. I want to live here, with you, not as your husband, unless you ever want that again, but as someone who finally understands what matters. Clara searched his face, her eyes glistening. Why now? What's changed? Everything, he said, voice thick with emotion. I spent years building a life out of control, power, distance, thinking that would make me strong. But strength isn't about never breaking. It's about letting yourself be seen in the broken places. And you've been holding space for mine all along. She didn't answer right away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key, old, tarnished, tied to a faded blue ribbon. This opens the library desk, she said. The one by the window. Inside, there's a letter, dated yesterday. Alexander stared at it, stunned. You wrote another one? I wrote it the morning you arrived, she admitted. Before I knew if you'd stay or run again. I wrote it hoping you'd choose to stay. He took the key, his fingers brushing hers. Can I read it now? She shook her head gently. Not yet. Read it when you've spent a full week here. When you've watered the roses, fixed the loose step on the porch, sat in silence with me at sunset. Prove to yourself, not to me, that you're ready to live in the truth, not just visit it. He nodded, closing his hand around the key like a vow. They sat together in Ethan's room for a long while after that. No words, just presence. Two souls who had wandered far from home, finally finding their way back through the ruins of their shared past. And as the afternoon light deepened into amber, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He tucked the stuffed lion back under Ethan's pillow. Then he whispered, soft but sure, I'm home, buddy. Each morning, he rose before dawn and walked the garden paths with Clara, not speaking much, just breathing the same air, watching the roses unfurl under her careful hands. He'd fixed the loose step on the porch, knees bruised, fingers raw, but he'd done it without being asked. He'd cleaned out the library shelves, sorting through mildewed books and yellowed letters, his silence heavy with reverence. And every evening, without fail, he sat with Clara on the veranda as the sun dipped below the hills, 2 mugs of chamomile steaming between them, the space between their shoulders growing smaller each night. Now, on the 7th evening, he stood alone in the library, the small key Clara had given him warm in his palm. Rain tapped gently on the roof, a soft echo of the storm that had changed everything. He knelt before the old mahogany desk by the window, the one bathed in late afternoon light. His hands trembled as he turned the key in the lock. It clicked open with a sigh, as if the wood itself remembered secrets. Inside lay a single envelope, her handwriting elegant, steady, spelled his name like a prayer. He sat on the floor, back against the desk, and opened it. Alexander, if you're reading this, you stayed. Not just with your body, but with your heart. That's what I needed to know. I don't expect us to be who we were. We've both been carved by loss, reshaped by time. But maybe, just maybe, we can build something new from the pieces we still carry. You asked once if I could ever trust you again. Trust isn't given all at once. It's grown, like the apple tree, like the roses, like love that chooses to stay, day after day, even when it's hard. So here's my choice. I'll walk this path with you, not as a promise of forever, but as a commitment to now. To honesty, to showing up even when it hurts. And if you're willing, meet me at the orchard at sunset. Bring the astronaut. Ethan would want him there. Clara Alexander read it twice, then a third time, tears blurring the ink. He pressed the letter to his chest and stood, heart pounding not with fear, but with something tender and terrifying, hope. He found the plastic astronaut in his coat pocket, still missing one arm, still grinning. He tucked it into his palm like a talisman and walked out into the golden hush of evening. The orchard lay at the far edge of the property, where the land sloped gently toward a brook that sang over smooth stones. Clara was already there, standing beneath the old apple tree, the one with Ethan's initials carved deep into the bark. She turned as he approached, her dress catching the last light like spun gold. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just held out her hand. He took it. No words passed between them. None were needed. Together they knelt at the base of the tree. Alexander placed the astronaut gently in the soil, right beside a small stone painted with a yellow sun, the one from Ethan's box, now weathered but still bright. Clara reached into her basket and pulled out a sapling Livia's cutting, rooted and strong. "Plant it with me?" she asked softly. He nodded, digging into the earth with his bare hands, feeling the cool soil beneath his nails, real and grounding. She placed the young tree in the hole, and they covered its roots together, their fingers brushing, mingling dirt and memory. When it was done, they sat side by side, shoulders touching, watching the sky bleed from amber to violet. "I'm not the man I was," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "and I'm not the woman I was either. But maybe we're exactly who we need to be now." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the ghost of their past, but the quiet strength of their present. "I don't need a second chance," he said. "I just need today, and tomorrow, and however many days you'll let me stay." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just slightly. "Then stay." Above them, the first stars blinked awake. And in the hush of the orchard, beneath the tree that held their son's name and the sapling kitchen, where she'd already set out 2 mugs and a loaf of bread she'd baked the night before, he learned to make tea the way she liked it. 2 chamomile bags, steeped just long enough, never stirred with a spoon, always with honey from the hives at the edge of the orchard. One morning, as mist curled over the garden like breath on glass, he found her kneeling by the rose bushes, pruning shears in hand, dirt smudged on her cheek. "Let me help," he said, kneeling beside her without waiting for an answer. She handed him a pair of gloves, his size, though he hadn't noticed them before. "You'll want these. The thorns are sharp this time of year." He pulled them on, fingers brushing hers, and began working in silence. For a while, the only sounds were the snip of shears, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a thrush. Then softly Clara spoke. "Do you remember the first time we planted these?" He paused, looking at the deep red blooms swaying in the breeze. "You were wearing that yellow dress, the one with the sunflowers. You got soil all over it and laughed for an hour." A faint smile touched her lips. "You carried me inside afterward, boots and all, because I refused to leave until every root was settled." "I thought you were mad," he said, voice thick with memory. "But you just said, 'Some things are worth getting dirty for.'" They worked in silence again, but the air between them felt lighter, as if the past wasn't a weight anymore, but a foundation. Later that afternoon, as rain threatened once more, Alexander climbed the attic stairs, something he'd avoided for years. Inside, dust motes danced in slanted light, and boxes sat labeled in Clara's neat script. Winter linens, books, keep, Ethan art projects. He opened the last one. Inside were drawings, clay sculptures hardened with time, a tiny shoebox labeled treasures. He lifted out a lopsided clay heart, painted blue. On the back, in wobbly letters, "For Mom and Dad, love is forever." His breath caught. Clara appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. He made that the day he learned the word, forever. Alexander turned, eyes glistening. "I kept everything locked away because I thought remembering would destroy me. But it's the forgetting that nearly did." She stepped inside and knelt beside him. "We don't have to live in the past," she said gently, "but we can honor it. Let it teach us how to love better now." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd abandoned, but the one who had stayed, not out of obligation, but out of love that refused to die. "What if I fail again?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You will," she said honestly. "We both will. But failure isn't the end, it's just part of the path. As long as we keep choosing to come back to each other, that's what matters." Outside, thunder rumbled, a soft echo of the storm that had first cracked them open. That evening, as twilight settled like a sigh over the estate, Alexander lit a fire in the drawing room. Not for warmth, but for presence. Clara joined him, carrying 2 blankets. They sat side by side on the rug, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders shared the same space. "I called my assistant today," he said quietly. "Told her to cancel everything for the next 6 months. Sell the penthouse. Downsize the company board. I'm stepping back." Clara turned to him, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "I spent my life building monuments to my ego. But real legacy isn't in stock prices or skyscrapers. It's in showing up, in tending gardens, in remembering names, in staying." She reached for his hand then, not out of romance but kinship. "Then stay." And as the fire crackled and the rain began to fall outside, they sat together in the quiet heart of Langford Manor. Not as exes, not as strangers, but as 2 souls learning, slowly, how to build a home from the ruins of their love. Not perfect, not fixed. But one morning, as dew still silvered the grass, Alexander sat alone at the old writing desk in the library, a sheet of thick cream paper before him, pen in hand. He'd tried 3 drafts already, each too formal, too stiff, too much like a business letter and not enough like a soul laid bare. He crumpled the latest attempt and let it fall to the floor among its siblings. "You're overthinking it," Clara said gently from the doorway. He didn't look up. "How do you apologize for reducing someone to a distraction? For calling her a hobby, like she was something to be shelved when inconvenient?" Clara stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside him. "You don't apologize with grand words. You apologize with truth." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I need her to know I see her now. Not as a muse or an escape, but as a person who deserved better." "Then tell her that," Clara said, leaning against the desk. "Not to fix anything, just to honor what happened." He looked at her, gratitude softening his eyes. "You're too good to me." "I'm not good," she corrected softly. "I'm just done pretending. And maybe that's the gift she gave us both." He nodded slowly, then picked up the pen again. This time he didn't write like a tycoon. He wrote like a man who'd finally remembered how to feel. "Dear Livia, I've started this letter a dozen times, trying to find words worthy of your kindness and my regret. But the truth is simpler than eloquence. You weren't my little hobby. You were a mirror. And in your eyes, I saw the hollow man I'd become, the one who treated people like temporary comforts because he was too afraid to be truly known. You didn't deserve to be folded into my avoidance. You deserved honesty, presence, respect. And though I failed to give you that, I hope you know your courage changed everything. You saw Clara not as a ghost of my past, but as a woman worthy of dignity. You painted her grief with reverence. And in doing so, you reminded me that love isn't about possession. It's about witness. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I will carry your lesson with me. That real connection begins when we stop performing and start showing up, as we are, broken and beautiful. Wherever you are, I hope you're painting. I hope you're planting that apple cutting in soil kissed by sun. And I hope you never again settle for being someone's hobby when you were always meant to be their equal. With deepest respect and gratitude, Alexander *. He set the pen down, throat tight. The words weren't perfect, but they were true. Clara read over his shoulder, silent for a long moment. Then she touched his arm. "She'll understand." He folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote Livia's name with slow, deliberate strokes. "Do you think she'll write back?" "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "But that's not why you wrote it, is it?" He looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. Not the polished smile of boardrooms, but a quiet, weathered thing born of humility. "No. I wrote it because I needed to become the kind of man who could write it." Later that afternoon, as golden light poured through the orchard, Alexander walked to the edge of the property where the postbox stood. A rusted iron relic Clara kept painted white each spring. He slipped the letter inside and closed the lid with a soft click. As he turned to go, Clara was waiting beneath the young apple tree, the one Livia's cutting had become. It was barely waist-high, but its leaves shimmered in the breeze like tiny green promises. "She'd like knowing it's growing," Clara said. He joined her, standing close enough that their sleeves brushed. "Maybe one day she'll come back to see it." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe this is enough, that we honor her part in our story, even if she never returns." They stood in silence, watching the sun dip low, casting long shadows across the earth they were learning to tend together. And in that quiet moment, Alexander understood. Redemption wasn't about undoing the past. It was about living differently now, so fully, so honestly, that even mistakes became seeds for something new. The wind stirred the leaves above them, soft as a whisper, and somewhere, far away, a letter carried a man's apology. Not as an end, but as of that evening, as fireflies began to blink in the garden like scattered stars, Clara found him standing on the porch, staring at the spot where Livia had last stood. The moon hung low and full, casting silver across the wet grass, turning the estate into something dreamlike, sacred. "You're thinking about the title," she said softly, joining him at the railing. He didn't look at her, but nodded. "The Tycoon's little hobby affair at the country estate." He let out a bitter laugh. "It sounds so trivial, like a tabloid headline. But it wasn't trivial, was it?" "No," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool night air. "It was a symptom." He turned to her then, eyes raw with understanding. "I called her that because I'd spent years treating everything and everyone as disposable. Deals, relationships, even grief. If it got too heavy, I'd label it, compartmentalize it, tuck it away. Hobby, project, phase, anything but real. And me?" she asked gently. "What did you call me when you left?" He flinched. "I didn't have a word for you. That was the problem. You were too big for labels, too real. So I ran." Clara looked out at the orchard, where the young apple tree swayed in the breeze. "You used hobby to make something meaningful feel small, safe, controllable. But love doesn't work that way. Grief doesn't either. They demand to be felt, not managed." Alexander leaned against the porch post, head bowed. "All this time, I thought power meant never needing anyone. But real strength, it's in letting yourself be seen in your mess, in staying when it hurts, in calling things by their true names." She stepped closer. "So what would you call it now? If someone asked you about Livia, about us, about this place?" He was silent for a long moment. Then softly, "A reckoning, a homecoming, a second chance not to rewrite the past, but to live differently in its shadow." Clara smiled, a quiet, luminous thing. "Then maybe the title was never about her, or even about you as a tycoon. Maybe it was always about the lie you told yourself, that people could be hobbies, that love could be temporary." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd abandoned, but the one who had held their son's memory like a flame in the dark, and never let it go out. "I don't want hobbies anymore," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I want depth. I want truth. I want you. Not as a ghost of who we were, but as the woman you are now, the one who stayed, who healed, who still believes in planting trees she may never sit under." Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "And what if I'm still afraid? What if part of me wonders if you'll vanish again the moment the pain gets too sharp?" "Then I'll keep showing up," he said without hesitation. "Every morning, every storm, every silence. Not because I deserve your trust, but because you deserve my honesty, even when it's messy." Above them, an owl called, a low, resonant sound that seemed to echo through the bones of the house itself. Inside, the grandfather clock chimed midnight. And in that moment, beneath a sky dusted with stars and a past finally laid bare, Alexander Langford understood the true weight of the title. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a fling. It was a mirror. And in its reflection, he'd finally seen himself, not as the untouchable tycoon, but as a man who had treated love like a pastime until it almost cost him everything. Now he chose to treat it like what it was, sacred. He reached for Clara's hand, not to pull her close, but to offer his presence, steady and sure. She took it. No words passed between them. None were needed, because the title no longer defined them. Alexander knelt in the soft earth beside Clara, their hands brushing as they pressed a new sapling into the ground. A white dogwood, chosen for its blossoms that would bloom each April, the month Ethan was born. They dug the hole together, mixed compost into the soil, watered it with rain collected in old copper buckets. No grand ceremony, just presence, just care. Clara sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. "He would have loved this," she said softly, not needing to say his name. Alexander looked at the two trees side by side, the old one bearing Ethan's initials, the new one stretching toward the sun, and felt something shift inside him, not like a wound closing, but like a root finally finding purchase. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," he murmured, brushing dirt from his palms. "But it's the opposite, isn't it? It's remembering, and choosing to carry it gently." Clara turned to him, her eyes warm with a peace that hadn't been there a year ago, maybe not even a month. "Grief doesn't disappear," she said. "It just learns to walk beside you, and sometimes it even helps you plant gardens." A breeze stirred the orchard, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine, Ethan's magic cookies. For a heartbeat, the air felt charged, alive with something unseen but deeply felt. Alexander didn't speak. He simply reached for Clara's hand, and she let him take it. Not out of obligation, not out of nostalgia, but because they had both chosen, day after day, to stay. Later that afternoon, as golden light slanted through the library windows, Alexander opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one where he'd once locked away all reminders of his son. Now it held sketches Livia had left behind, letters from Clara, a smooth river stone painted with a yellow sun, and the plastic astronaut, still missing one arm but standing proudly on a small wooden pedestal Ethan had carved long ago. He picked up the astronaut and carried it outside. Clara was already there, waiting beneath the trees, holding 2 mugs of tea. "He'd be 8 now," she said quietly as Alexander joined her. "Yeah," he replied, voice thick. "He'd be climbing that old oak by the brook, asking a million questions, driving you mad with dinosaur facts." She smiled, tears glistening. "And you'd pretend to be annoyed, but you'd listen to every word." They sat on the weathered bench they'd restored together, shoulders touching, sipping tea in comfortable silence. No need to fill the space with noise. They'd learned that some silences weren't empty. They were full of everything words could never hold. After a while, Clara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder what happens next?" Alexander looked at her, really looked, and saw not the ghost of their past, but the quiet strength of their present. "I don't need to know," he said, "because whatever comes, we'll face it together. Not as who we were, but as who we're becoming." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just slightly. "That's enough." And it was. Not because the pain was gone, not because the past was fixed, but because they had stopped running from it. They had planted trees in its shadow. They had built a home from its ruins. They had learned that second chances aren't about erasing mistakes. They're about choosing, every single day, to live with more honesty, more tenderness, more love. As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, Alexander slipped his arm around Clara's shoulders. She didn't pull away. Above them, the first stars blinked awake. And somewhere, in the quiet heart of Langford Manor, it almost felt like a little boy was watching, smiling, knowing his parents had finally found their way back to each other, and to themselves. No grand finale, no dramatic vows, just 2 souls, sitting in the dusk, holding hands, letting the past breathe, and the future unfold, one honest breath at a time. Because sometimes the most powerful endings aren't about